Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 3, the Albigenses, from Orders of the Quest, The Holy Grail, by Manly P. Hall. The Albigenses. In order to appreciate the degree of organized resistance that developed in Europe against the remnants of the pagan philosophic schools, it is only necessary to consider the fate of the Albigensian heretics. The sect originated in Manichaeism, a school of esoteric philosophy which exercised a considerable influence over the early life of St. Augustine. Later, this pious man devoted much time and many words to a bitter denunciation of the heretics manes. It is probable that the Albigenses originated in Bulgaria, but their principal stronghold was in southern France, where they created a considerable stir during the 12th and 13th centuries. So thoroughly were the Albigensian doctrines stamped out by the Roman Church that it is almost impossible to restore the structure of their beliefs. We know that they were Catharists, believing in the ultimate salvation of all men. They were devout Christians, but rejected the machinery of the church, and taught that any who died without being reconciled to God through the mystery of Christ would be born again in the physical world as a human being or an animal. The Catharists baptized by the laying on of hands, and taught that the kingdom of Christ was a mystery of the Spirit and not of this world. The Albigenses also derived inspiration from the Bogomils, a religious community of considerable antiquity which inspired many of the unorthodox sects of Russia. The Bogomils denied the miraculous birth of Christ, rejected most of the sacraments of the church, baptized only adults, had no formal places of worship, and interpreted the miracles of Jesus mystically rather than literally. They had the quaint notion that Satan was responsible for setting up all the churches of Christendom as a means of destroying human souls. It is quite understandable that in 1209, Pope Innocent III obliged the Cistercians to preach a crusade against the Albigensian heretics. In the civil war that followed, the Provençal civilization was destroyed, but the Albigenses survived. About 30 years later, the Inquisition stepped in with better success. Maurice Meagher writes of the Albigenses thus: I feel indignant at a great injustice which has never been remedied and seems unlikely to be remedied. Those self-controlled, unassuming men who lived in southern France during the 13th century, whose practical rule was poverty and whose ideal was love of their fellow men, were exterminated, and calumny has triumphantly wiped out even their name and their memory. Calumny has been so active and so skillful that the descendants of those wonderful men are unaware of the noble history of their ancestors, and when they wish to learn it, it is presented in such a fashion that they blush at their extraordinary past. It seems that some of the Catharist communities practiced a mode of life strongly reminiscent of the Syrian Essenes. C.W. Heckethorn gives us an excellent summary of their doctrine and conduct. In spite of the church, many Italian cities, including Milan, Florence, Naples, and even Rome itself, were centers of the Cathar activity. A Cathar concealed its doctrines from all but its highest initiates. It taught metempsychosis, assuming that to attain the light, 7 such transmigrations were required. This, however, may possibly refer to the degrees of their initiation. They rejected the Old Testament account of the creation and had communistic tendencies, were adverse to marriage, were philanthropic. They lived industrious lives, combining saving habits with charity, founded schools and hospitals. They performed their ceremonies in forests, caverns, and remote valleys. At his initiation, the novice received a garment made of fine linen and wool, which he wore under his shirt. The women received a girdle which they wore next to the skin above the waist. The same author describes the fate of Docino, one of the leaders of the Italian Catharsists. He and his wife Margaret were pursued by the Inquisition in 1307. They were captured and torn to pieces. limb by limb, and the pieces afterward burned by the public executioner. 15 years later, 30 of Docino's disciples were burned alive in the marketplace at Padua. The remnants of these so-called heretical movements found some refuge in Eastern Europe, in the areas which came under the political domination of the Turks, under the general name Albigenses. These several schools of primitive and mystical Christianity bestowed their light and vitality upon the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians, and later by descent upon the Bavarian Illuminatists. The Crusaders brought back to Europe the Eastern Manichaeism, with its rationalizing and modernating influences. Reforms long overdue began to stir beneath the surface of the medieval world. As one writer has expressed it, philosophy, republicanism, and industry assailed the Holy See. It is known that the inner council of the Albigenses consisted of initiates whose method of development was not dissimilar to that of the Gnostics or the Neoplatonists. These initiates were initially enlightened men, dedicated to the perpetuation of Plato's concept of the philosophic empire and the philosophic king. Only those who lived the Christian life could know the Christian doctrine. By the end of the 14th century, the sect disappeared entirely, and such physical power as it may have been said to enjoy was entirely destroyed. This so-called power was simply an appeal to virtue, and at no time did the sect exhibit any physical ambitions other than those of justice, charity, and humility. It is certain that the adepts of the Albigenses, Catharists, and Bogomils did not perish with the fall of their schools. Such a sacrifice would have accomplished nothing of practical benefit to mankind. They chose to remain hidden and to create new channels for the dissemination of their doctrines. These channels changed their appearance to meet the requirements of time and place. Thus, there is no break in the esoteric descent of essential truths, even though the physical institutions were destroyed by the fanaticism and cruelty of an unbelieving world. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.